He had ordered executions with a nod of his head. He had watched men beg, bargain, and bleed without a flicker of mercy. Yet that night, the most dangerous man in New York froze. Not because of the gun on the table, not because of the sniper waiting on the rooftop, but because a waitress quiet, shaking, invisible leaned in and whispered one sentence in Russian that was never meant to be translated. 3 seconds later, the room erupted. A traitor was exposed, a deal collapsed, a massacre was narrowly avoided, and Damon Cross realized something that chilled him far more than the threat of death. The girl holding the tray was not just smart, she was not just brave. She understood a language that could destroy empires. What Damon didn't know, what no one in that room could possibly imagine, was that this meeting had been engineered long before that night, and that saving his life would cost her freedom. The first time Damon Cross would lose control, it wouldn't be because of a gun, a rival, or a betrayal. It would be because of a woman whose name he didn't yet know, standing 3 steps behind him, holding a silver tray, listening far too closely. No one noticed Lydia Hart when she entered the VIP room of Obsidian. That was the point. In this place, invisibility was survival. The lighting was low, the walls soaked in velvet darkness, the air heavy with expensive liquor and unspoken threats. Men here spoke softly, not out of politeness, but because shouting was unnecessary when violence was always implied. Lydia kept her head lowered, eyes trained on the floor, her posture rehearsed to be forgettable. She had learned long ago that the safest way to exist was to leave no imprint at all. Yet inside her mind, nothing was quiet. Every word bounced, split, reconstructed. Russian syllables curled and unfolded with precise meaning. Accents revealed regions. Pauses revealed lies. Lydia didn't listen the way most people did. She dissected language, stripped it to bone and intent. It was a gift she had never wanted and had spent most of her life hiding. On the table before Damon Cross lay a Glock pistol, casually placed as if it were a pen or a phone. The message was clear: negotiations here ended only one way. Damon himself sat relaxed, spine straight, dark eyes unreadable. To the public, he was a ruthless investor, a man whose companies swallowed competitors whole. In sealed files and whispered circles, he was something else entirely: a strategist, a predator, a king without a crown. Across from him sat 3 men from the Russian syndicate. Their smiles were thin, rehearsed. The air between them was stretched tight, waiting to snap. The translator beside Damon swallowed hard before speaking. "They say the price needs adjustment," he translated, voice trembling just enough to be believable. "They want a reduction." Lydia's fingers tightened around the tray. That was wrong. The Russian sentence had nothing to do with money. It spoke of distance, angles, and timing. It spoke of a rifle positioned above the West Wing, of a shot calculated to strike before anyone could react. It spoke of Damon Cross dying in this room, his blood soaking into imported carpet, his empire collapsing before dawn. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. Lydia could walk away. She was nobody, a waitress paid in cash, invisible and expendable. If she left now, the rules would protect her. She would survive. But if the gunshot came, no one else in this room would. Damon leaned back in his chair, eyes flicking briefly to the translator. Something about the man's stiffness registered. Damon's voice was calm, dangerously so. "A reduction," he repeated. "That's disappointing." The Russians exchanged glances. One of them smiled wider. Lydia's breath caught. She saw it all unfolding with brutal clarity the second of silence before the shot. The chaos after, the bodies that would fall simply for being present. Damon's hand rested near the Glock. Then he spoke again, his gaze drifting, almost lazily, until it landed on her. "You," he said. The words sliced through her like glass. Lydia froze. "You've been standing there for 5 minutes." Damon continued, listening. The room shifted. Attention snapped to her like a trap closing. "If you're as smart as your face suggests," Damon said coolly. "Translate." For a heartbeat, Lydia forgot how to breathe. Every instinct screamed at her to deny it, to apologize, to retreat. But denial would be a lie, and lies were already saturating the room. Slowly, deliberately, she lifted her head. Her eyes met Damon's. They were darker than she expected, not cold-measured, calculating, as if he were already mapping every possible outcome of this moment. Lydia spoke before fear could stop her. "That's not what they said," she said quietly. The translator stiffened. One of the Russians swore under his breath. Damon didn't react. "Then enlighten us." Her voice was steady now, surprising even herself. "They're not negotiating. They're stalling." She paused, choosing her words with surgical care. "There's a sniper on the West Wing rooftop. The shot is timed for when you lean forward." Silence crashed down. A fraction of a second later, Damon moved. He didn't reach for the gun. He didn't duck. He simply leaned back slowly, deliberately, his eyes never leaving Lydia's face. His men reacted instantly, weapons raised, bodies repositioning with trained precision. The Russian who had been smiling lunged for the table. The gunshot never came. Within seconds, the room was chaos. Shouting, gunfire, men dragged down and restrained. When it was over, one man lay bleeding on the floor, the translator sobbing beside him, exposed for what he was. Lydia stood frozen, her tray forgotten, heart hammering so violently she thought it might tear free of her chest. Damon rose from his seat and approached her. Up close, his presence was overwhelming, not loud, not aggressive, but absolute. He studied her as if she were a puzzle he hadn't expected to find. "What's your name?" he asked. "Lydia," she said. "Lydia Hart." He nodded once, committing it to memory. "You just saved my life." She swallowed. "I didn't mean to." "I know," Damon interrupted softly. "That's what makes it interesting." He signaled to one of his men, who slipped a thick stack of bills into Lydia's trembling hands. Damon's fingers brushed her wrist briefly, an electric, unsettling contact. "You're fired," he said. Relief surged through her so sharply her knees almost gave out. Then he added, "From this place." Her relief shattered. "Tomorrow," Damon continued, voice smooth as silk over steel, "you work for me." Lydia stared at him, understanding dawning too late. She hadn't stepped out of danger. She had stepped directly into its center. And as Damon Cross watched her walk away, shaken but unbroken, a single thought settled in his mind, quiet, dangerous, irreversible. That girl was more threatening than any weapon he owned. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel to enjoy many more heart-stirring stories every week. Lydia did not sleep that night. The city outside her apartment window pulsed with sirens and neon, indifferent to the quiet catastrophe unfolding in her chest. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Damon Cross's gaze steady, assessing, far too calm for a man who had almost died. She replayed his words again and again, searching for a loophole that did not exist. "Tomorrow, you work for me." By morning, the money he had pressed into her hand lay untouched on the table. She showered, dressed, and told herself that if nothing else happened, she would disappear, she would change jobs, she would be careful. Men like Damon Cross lost interest quickly. They always did. At exactly 9 o'clock, a black car stopped outside her building. The knock on her door was polite, controlled, unavoidable. The man waiting in the hallway wore a tailored suit and an expression so neutral it was unsettling. "Miss Hart," he said, "your mother has been transferred to St. Aurelius Medical Center. Private room, top specialists. Everything has been arranged." Lydia's heart dropped. "What? The bill has been settled," he continued smoothly. "Mr. Cross sends his regards." Fear, sharp and immediate, cut through her disbelief. St. Aurelius was impossible exclusive, ruinously expensive. Lydia hadn't even been able to afford her mother's last treatment. "I didn't agree to this," she said. "No," the man replied. "You didn't." 2 hours later, Lydia stood in the lobby of Cross Tower. Glass and steel rose around her like a monument to controlled power. There were no visible weapons, no raised voices, no chaos. Everything here was efficiency wrapped in luxury. As she was escorted upward, Lydia realized something chilling this place was far more dangerous than Obsidian. Violence here did not explode. It was planned, documented, and erased. Damon Cross was waiting. He stood by the windows of his office, backlit by the city skyline, hands clasped loosely behind him. He didn't turn when Lydia entered. "You're punctual," he said. "That's good." "I want my mother left out of this," Lydia said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. Damon finally faced her. That was never an option. Anger flared through the fear. "You can't buy people. I don't buy people," Damon said calmly. "I invest in outcomes." He gestured toward the table. Stacks of files waited there, documents dense with symbols, numbers, fractured languages. Lydia recognized patterns immediately. Encryption layered over dialects. Messages designed to be read only by those who understood not just words, but intent. "You're going to tell me who's lying," Damon said. "Who's stealing? Who's planning to kill me next?" "And if I refuse," Lydia asked. Damon held her gaze. "Then the doctors treating your mother will be reassigned. Bureaucracy is tedious that way." The cruelty wasn't in his words. It was in their precision. Lydia took a slow breath. "You already have analysts." "I have loyal analysts," Damon corrected. "I don't have someone who hears what people mean." She hated how well he understood her. Hated that part of her, the part that thrilled at complexity, at the challenge stirred despite everything. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the rustle of pages and the faint hum of the city below. Lydia worked. She lost herself in the patterns, in the logic, in the satisfaction of unraveling lies. Damon watched from a distance, saying little, noticing everything. "You're not afraid of me," he observed finally. "I am," Lydia replied without looking up. "I just don't let it make my decisions." That earned her a faint, unreadable smile. As night fell, something shifted. The edge between them softened not into trust, but into awareness. Damon brought her food without comment. Lydia accepted it without thanks. They shared the space like two opposing forces temporarily aligned. Then Lydia froze. "These transactions," she said slowly, tapping the page, "they loop back, not to your competitors, to a holding company." Damon's jaw tightened. "Which one?" She slid the paper toward him. "Cole Enterprises." For the first time. Damon's composure cracked. Sebastian Cole was not just a name. He was legacy, mentor, the man who had taught Damon how to survive, how to kill, how to win. He had retired years ago, supposedly. "This is impossible," Damon said. Lydia met his eyes. "It isn't..." Silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. If Cole was moving pieces again, then Lydia wasn't just an asset. She was a variable introduced into a long-running game. Damon exhaled slowly. "You should know something," he said. "People who learn this much don't walk away." "I didn't ask to be here," Lydia replied. "No," Damon agreed. "But now you're visible." The word echoed in her chest. As she left Cross Tower late that night, Lydia understood the truth she had been avoiding since Obsidian. The danger was no longer the men with guns. It was the man who had decided she was worth keeping alive. By the third day inside Cross Tower, Lydia understood that Damon Cross did not rule through noise or fear alone. He ruled through structure. Every hallway, every assistant, every silent nod carried intention. Nothing here was accidental, including her. She was given a temporary office glass walls, minimal furniture, no locks on the inside, a courtesy, not freedom. Damon never said she was being watched, but she felt it in the way doors opened before she reached them, in the way coffee appeared exactly when her concentration wavered. The work deepened. The files Damon brought her now were not just transactions or coded messages. They were history's alliances disguised as charities, shell companies layered beneath philanthropy, conversations written in the polite language of old power. Lydia began to see the pattern emerging beneath the noise. Someone wasn't attacking Damon directly. They were tightening a circle around him, slow enough to look like coincidence. She worked late into the night, fingers smudged with ink, mind sharp despite exhaustion. Damon passed by her office without comment, sometimes pausing just long enough to observe. He never interrupted. He never praised. That, somehow, unsettled her more than intimidation. "You're not trying to intimidate me," Lydia said one evening without looking up. "No," Damon replied from the doorway. "I'm trying not to influence you." She glanced up, surprised. "Why?" "Because fear lies," he said simply. The honesty in that answer struck deeper than any threat. As the hours accumulated, so did something else, an awareness that threaded itself through their interactions. Damon noticed when Lydia skipped meals. Lydia noticed when Damon's control slipped, just slightly, after certain names appeared on her reports. They spoke less about power and more about choices, not philosophically, practically. What cost was acceptable? What line could not be crossed? "You're building something new," Lydia said one night, tracing a network on her screen. "You don't want chaos, you want permanence." Damon's gaze lingered on her longer than usual. "And that surprises you, yes?" she admitted. "Men like you usually don't plan for a future that doesn't include them at the top." A faint smile curved his mouth. "Men like me plan for survival. Everything else is decoration." The words stayed with her. The first crack appeared just after midnight on the 5th day. Lydia was reviewing a sequence of messages when she realized the timestamps didn't align. The error was subtle, so subtle it had been missed by everyone else. She cross-referenced quickly, heart pounding, and felt a chill crawl up her spine. This wasn't a leak. It was a test. "These communications," she said when Damon appeared behind her, drawn by the change in her posture. "They're meant to be found. Whoever planted them wanted you to follow this trail." "To what?" he asked. "To me," Lydia replied quietly. Damon's expression hardened. "Explain." She did. How the language shifted just enough to catch her attention. How the encryption mirrored techniques she'd studied years ago, methods no one used anymore unless they were deliberately signaling to a very specific audience. To someone who thinks like this, she said. Someone who understands how I think. Damon went still. Who? Lydia hesitated. Someone who's been watching me. Silence pressed in around them, heavier than before. That's impossible, Damon said finally. You weren't on anyone's radar. I was, Lydia countered. I just didn't know it. He studied her with a new intensity, not as an asset, but as a risk. Why didn't you tell me this sooner? Because I wasn't sure, she replied. And because if I was right, it meant I wasn't brought to Obsidian by chance. The implication settled between them like a loaded weapon. That night, Lydia dreamed of her mother's hospital room bright, clean, impossibly safe. When she woke, she realized safety was an illusion Damon could revoke at any time. The knowledge should have terrified her. Instead, it sharpened her resolve. She confronted him the next morning. You said this wasn't about owning people, Lydia said, standing across from Damon's desk. So let's be clear about the terms. Damon raised an eyebrow. There are terms. There are always terms, she said. I work for you. I tell you the truth. But you don't use my past against me. And you don't let whoever is pulling these strings get access to my mother. Damon considered her for a long moment. And if I say no, then you'll never know which of your allies plans to betray you next, Lydia replied evenly. And you'll lose the only person who can see this pattern forming. A challenge. A calculated one. Damon stood slowly, moving around the desk until they were only inches apart. Lydia refused to step back. His presence was overwhelming controlled power wrapped in restraint. But there was something else beneath it now. Respect. Perhaps. Or recognition. You're negotiating with a man who doesn't sign contracts, Damon said. I know, Lydia replied. That's why I'm still here. For a heartbeat. He said nothing. Then, quietly. Agreed, Ade. The word felt heavier than any signature. As Lydia turned to leave, Damon spoke again. You should know once this is over. Walking away won't be simple. She paused. Hand on the door. It never is. When she left, Damon watched her go. Aware of the truth he hadn't voiced, the danger was no longer external. It was the growing certainty that Lydia Hart was becoming something far more disruptive than any enemy. She was becoming essential. Something changed after the agreement. Not in words, Damon Cross was not a man who softened his language, but in the air between them. The distance remained, precise and controlled. Yet it carried a different weight now. Lydia was no longer simply a tool. She was a variable Damon had chosen to keep close. And that choice altered the rhythm of everything. The work intensified. New files arrived daily, each more carefully layered than the last. Lydia moved through them with growing certainty, tracing invisible threads that connected shell companies, political donors, and offshore trusts. The picture forming beneath her fingertips was not chaotic. It was elegant. Someone was reorganizing Damon's world from the inside, using patience as a weapon. Late one evening, Lydia noticed a pattern in the access logs someone was viewing her reports before they reached Damon. She froze. These timestamps, she said quietly when Damon entered her office. They don't belong to your people. Damon's expression tightened as he scanned the screen. How sure are you? Certain, Lydia replied. They're careful. They don't alter anything. They just watch. Damon leaned back against the desk, arms crossed. Then they're confident. Or familiar, Lydia said. With you? The implication hung between them. For the first time since Lydia had met him, Damon looked unsettled, not afraid, calculating, as if a long-ignored shadow had finally stepped into the light. That night, Cross Tower felt less like a fortress and more like a stage. Security doubled. Damon canceled meetings without explanation. Lydia was moved closer to his office, her glass walls replaced with something thicker, darker, protection disguised as confinement. She understood the logic, even as she resented it. You don't trust your own building, Lydia said softly when Damon escorted her through the restricted floor. I trust systems, he replied. Not people. She stopped walking. That includes me. Damon turned to face her fully. You've earned my trust, he said. That's why you're in danger. The honesty in his voice unsettled her more than any lie could have. As the days passed, the tension between them sharpened into something intimate and unspoken. They worked in near silence, aware of each other's presence in a way that was impossible to ignore. Damon learned the cadence of Lydia's focus, the slight tilt of her head when something didn't add up, the way her fingers stilled just before she found what she was looking for. Lydia learned Damon's tells the faint tightening of his jaw when he was angry, the stillness that preceded decisive action. One night, well past midnight, Lydia looked up from her screen to find Damon watching her. "You don't ask why," he said. "Why what?" "Why I'm letting this happen," Damon replied. "Why I'm dismantling pieces of my own empire." Lydia considered him carefully. "Because you're tired," she said. "Not of power, of what it costs." The room went very still. Damon turned away, gaze fixed on the city below. "Power rots," he said after a moment. "If it doesn't evolve, it turns inward." Lydia joined him by the window, close enough to feel the heat of his presence without touching. "And you want to survive yourself," she said. His eyes met hers, dark and searching, for a heartbeat. The world narrowed to the space between them dangerous, electric, unresolved. The moment broke with the soft chime of Lydia's screen. She turned back sharply. "I found him." Damon moved instantly. "Who?" "The Observer," Lydia said, pulling up a hidden network. "He's not hiding behind competitors or rivals. He's anchored to a single entity, Cole Enterprises." The name landed like a gunshot. Damon's face closed off, every trace of vulnerability erased. "That's not possible," he said again, but this time the words lacked conviction. "Sebastian Cole didn't disappear," Lydia said. "He stepped back, and he's been watching you the entire time." Cole was not just a mentor. He was history. The man who had pulled Damon out of obscurity, shaped him, taught him how to rule without mercy and without apology. Damon had built his empire on those lessons and spent years quietly undoing them. "Why now?" Damon asked. Lydia hesitated. "Because of me." She explained how the encryption mirrored techniques from Cole's era, how the placement of the data wasn't meant to destabilize Damon immediately, but to test him, to see how he would respond to an anomaly, to see whether he had grown beyond his teacher or remained predictable. "And you," Damon said slowly, "are the anomaly." "Yes," Lydia replied. "I think he wanted to see who you would choose." The realization settled between them, heavy and unsettling. Lydia was not collateral damage. She was a message. That night, Damon insisted she stay in the tower. Lydia didn't argue. The city outside felt suddenly hostile, exposed. In the quiet of the secure floor, the tension between them grew harder to ignore. "You should leave," Damon said at last, standing near the doorway of the guest suite, "before this becomes something else." "And if I don't?" Lydia asked. His gaze darkened. "Then it becomes my responsibility." The words were not a promise. They were a warning. Lydia met his eyes, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "I've spent my life being invisible," she said. "I won't disappear now just because someone powerful is watching." Damon studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "Then we face him together." As the door closed behind her, Lydia leaned against it, heart racing. She understood now that the danger was no longer theoretical. Sebastian Cole had entered the game, and for the first time, Lydia wasn't sure whether Damon Cross was protecting her from the storm or drawing her deeper into its center. The invitation arrived the next morning, embossed in gold and wrapped in the language of charity. A gala at the Metropolitan Museum, donors, diplomats, old money wearing benevolence like perfume. Sebastian Cole's name appeared at the bottom of the card, elegant and deliberate, as if daring Damon to refuse. Damon didn't hesitate. "He wants an audience," he said, eyes unreadable. "So we give him one." Lydia felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a summons. Cole wasn't hiding anymore. He was inviting Damon back into his orbit, into the world where power smiled and blood stayed off the floors. "You won't go alone," Damon added. She looked up sharply. "I'm not a decoy." "No," Damon said quietly. "You're the point." The truth of that chilled her. Preparations moved quickly, efficiently. A dress was delivered to Lydia's suite that afternoon, dark silk, cut with restraint and intention. Not armor, but close. Damon watched her assess it, understanding flickering between them. "There will be eyes on you," he said, "people who don't miss details." "I know," Lydia replied. "I've been invisible to them my whole life." "That won't protect you tonight," Damon said. The ride to the museum was silent. Tension coiled tight between them. When the car stopped, flashes exploded against the windows. Damon stepped out first, every inch the composed magnate. He turned back and offered Lydia his hand. She hesitated only a second before taking it. Inside, the gala unfolded like a perfectly rehearsed illusion. Music drifted through marble halls. Laughter chimed. hollow and bright. Lydia felt the weight of 100 gazes the moment they entered, felt her anonymity evaporate beneath scrutiny. "Relax," Damon murmured as they moved through the crowd. "They smell fear." "And what do they do when they smell it?" Lydia asked softly. "They decide how to use you." She forced herself to breathe, to match his pace. His hand rested lightly at the small of her back, possessive enough to signal protection, distant enough to avoid suspicion. It was a careful balance, one that mirrored everything between them. Sebastian Cole found them near the central staircase. He was older than Lydia had imagined, silver-haired and impeccably dressed, his smile warm and knowing. His eyes, however, missed nothing. "Damon," Cole said, embracing him with the familiarity of a father greeting a son. "You've grown only because you taught me how," Damon replied smoothly. Cole's gaze slid to Lydia. "And you must be the reason my name has resurfaced in your world." Lydia met his stare, refusing to flinch. "Lydia Hart." "Of course you are," Cole said softly. "I've been looking forward to meeting you." The words carried a weight that made her skin prickle. This wasn't curiosity. It was recognition. They spoke of art, of donations, of the state of the world polite, empty topics that masked sharper intent. Cole never raised his voice, never pressed too hard. He didn't need to. He knew Damon was listening to every nuance. "You've been cleaning house," Cole remarked lightly, "shedding the more volatile elements of your operation?" Damon smiled. "Evolution is necessary. And risky," Cole replied, "particularly when sentiment gets involved." His gaze flicked briefly to Lydia. Later, as the night deepened and the crowd thinned, Lydia felt it a shift. Conversations faltered as Cole guided them toward a private gallery, away from the noise. Damon's grip tightened imperceptibly. "Careful," Lydia whispered. "This is his stage." "I know," Damon said. "And he's enjoying it." The gallery was quiet, lined with glass cases and ancient artifacts. Cole gestured for the guards to remain outside. When the doors closed, the atmosphere changed instantly. "You've always been ambitious," Cole said, turning to Damon. "But this bringing an untested variable into your inner circle, it's reckless." "She's not untested," Damon replied. "She's precise," Cole chuckled. "That's what makes her valuable. And dangerous." He faced Lydia fully now. "Do you know why you survived Obsidian?" he asked gently. Lydia's pulse quickened. "Because I spoke the truth?" "No," Cole said. "Because I allowed it." The words landed like a blow. "I've been watching you for some time," Cole continued. "Your academic work, your patterns, your talent for hearing what others miss. You're rare." Damon's expression hardened. "You're done." Cole raised a hand. "On the contrary, this is where it begins." He revealed it calmly, almost kindly, the blocked insurance claims, the redirected referrals, the quiet nudges that had pushed Lydia into Obsidian's orbit. Not cruelty curation. "I needed to see what Damon would do." Cole said, "Whether he would protect you or use you." Lydia turned to Damon, her chest tight. "You knew Damon didn't look away. I suspected the betrayal wasn't loud. It was precise, controlled, devastating." "You let him put me in danger," Lydia said, her voice steady despite the pain slicing through it. "I pulled you out the moment I realized," Damon replied. "I didn't know how far he'd gone." Cole watched them with quiet satisfaction. "See," he said, still predictable. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the moment. Security, timing, as always, on Cole's side. "Think carefully," Cole said as he stepped back. "You can dismantle your empire for her, or you can survive." He left them there, surrounded by glass and ancient lies. When Damon finally spoke, his voice was low. "We're leaving. Now." As they exited into the night, Lydia's thoughts raced. The world she had been pulled into was far more intricate than she'd believed, and she was no longer sure whether Damon was her shield, or the reason she had been placed in the line of fire. They didn't speak on the drive back. The city slid past the windows in streaks of light, distorted and unreal, as if Lydia were watching it through water. Damon sat beside her, posture rigid, jaw set, one hand resting on his knee like a man restraining something dangerous. Whatever had been said in that glass-lined gallery had followed them out into the night, heavy and unresolved. When the car finally stopped beneath Cross Tower, Lydia expected relief. Instead, she felt the walls closing in. The secure floor was quieter than usual, too quiet. Damon dismissed his security with a single look and guided Lydia down a corridor she had never been allowed to enter. The doors here were matte black, unmarked. When one of them opened, Lydia felt a chill crawl along her spine. Inside was a room stripped of luxury. No windows, no art, just a long table, reinforced walls, and a single overhead light casting sharp shadows. It was not a place for meetings. It was a place for endings. The Red Room, Lydia said softly, the name forming instinctively on her tongue. Damon didn't correct her. It's where lies stop being useful. The door closed behind them. Lydia turned to face him, the words she had been holding back finally breaking free. You let him shape my life, she said. You may not have planned it, but you benefited from it. Damon's eyes darkened. I didn't know he was using your mother, but you knew he was watching me, Lydia pressed. And you stayed silent. The accusation hung between them, sharp and undeniable. I was trying to protect you, Damon said, his voice low. The moment I realized how deep it went, I cut him out. You didn't cut him out, Lydia replied. You challenged him, and I was the proof he needed. Damon stepped closer, frustration cracking through his control. I didn't choose you as bait, but you chose me, Lydia said quietly. And that's worse. Silence fell, thick and suffocating. For the first time since she had met him, Damon looked human, not powerful, not untouchable, just a man who had made a calculation that cost more than he had expected. He taught me that everything has a price, Damon said finally, and that the only unforgivable weakness is attachment. Lydia's chest tightened. And yet here we are. He looked at her then not as an asset, not as a variable, but as something dangerously personal. You changed the equation, he admitted. Before she could respond, the room's monitor flickered to life. Sebastian Cole appeared on the screen, perfectly composed, as if he were seated in a study rather than intruding on a fortress. I was wondering when you'd bring her there, he said pleasantly. You always did like dramatic settings. Damon moved instantly, fury flashing across his face. You're trespassing. Cole smiled. I built half your security protocols. Don't insult me. Lydia felt the cold clarity settle in. This was never going to be private. Cole wanted witnesses. He wanted consequences. You see, Lydia, Cole continued, this is where Damon decides who he is. By letting you manipulate people, Lydia asked, her voice steady despite the fear threading through her. Cole tilted his head. By understanding that people are leverage, including you. Damon slammed his hand against the table. Enough! Cole's smile faded. You've gone soft, he said. You're dismantling what I gave you. And for what an illusion of morality. For choice, Damon shot back. Cole's gaze sharpened. Then choose. The room's lights dimmed slightly as another feed appeared security footage from St. Aurelius Medical Center. Lydia's breath caught. Don't, Damon warned. Cole ignored him. One phone call, he said calmly, and her protection disappears. No threats, just adjustments. Lydia turned to Damon, her heart pounding. This is what he wanted, she whispered. To force your hand. Damon closed his eyes for a brief moment, as if steadying himself. When he opened them, something had changed. No, he said. This is where it ends. He moved with sudden precision, fingers flying across the control panel. The screen flickered, Cole's image stuttering. You always assumed I was still your student. Damon continued, his voice cold and controlled, that I hadn't learned to lie back. The feed cut, alarms didn't sound, nothing dramatic happened. But Lydia felt the shift, the sense of a trap snapping shut, not around her, but around Cole. Still, the damage had been done. You could have lost her, Lydia said quietly once the silence returned. I won't, Damon replied, not to him. The certainty in his voice sent a conflicting rush through her relief, tangled with something far more dangerous. Lydia stepped back, needing distance. You don't get to decide that, she said. Not anymore. Damon's jaw tightened. I'm not asking for permission. That's the problem, Lydia replied. You never do. The words cut deeper than any accusation. She turned toward the door. I won't be your leverage, she said. Not for Cole, not for you. Damon reached for her wrist, stopping just short of contact. His restraint spoke louder than any plea. Walking away won't keep you safe, he said. Neither will staying, Lydia replied. She left him there, alone in the room where truths bled through concrete and steel. And as Damon stood in the silence, one realization settled with brutal clarity for the first time in his life. Power was not enough to protect the one thing he could no longer afford to lose. Lydia did not make it to the elevator. The moment she stepped into the corridor outside the Red Room, the lights flickered just once, subtle enough to be missed by anyone who didn't understand systems. Lydia felt it instantly, a tightening in her chest that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition. This wasn't Damon. This was Cole. The first shot shattered the silence like glass breaking underwater. Lydia dropped instinctively, the sound screaming past where her head had been a second earlier. Alarms erupted all at once, red lights flooding the corridor as security protocols failed in rapid succession. Someone had rewritten Damon's defenses from the inside. Footsteps thundered, voices barked orders. Somewhere close. Someone screamed. Damon was beside her in an instant, his body a solid shield as he dragged her behind a concrete pillar. "Stay down," he said sharply, already drawing his weapon. The calm in his voice was terrifyingly complete. "They're inside," Lydia whispered, her mind racing. This was planned before the gala. "I know," Damon replied. "Cole never improvises." Two men rounded the corner, weapons raised. Damon fired without hesitation, precise and lethal. Lydia flinched as bodies hit the floor, the reality of it slamming into her harder than the noise. This wasn't theory or threat. This was execution. "Move," Damon said, pulling her up. They ran not blindly, but with intention. Damon navigated corridors Lydia had never seen, doors unlocking at his touch, others forced open with controlled violence. The tower that had once felt impenetrable now felt like a maze designed to trap them both. As they descended a service stairwell, Lydia's mind cut through panic with brutal clarity. "He's not trying to kill you," she said. "Not yet." Damon shot her a glance. "Explain?" "He wants you cornered," Lydia said breathlessly, stripped of options. "This is escalation, not an ending." Another explosion rocked the building, the impact throwing them both against the railing. Lydia cried out as pain flared through her shoulder. Damon caught her before she fell, his grip tightening. "You're hit," he said. "It's nothing," she lied. His jaw clenched. "Don't do that." They reached the underground level just as a line of black SUVs roared into view, blocking the exit. Armed men poured out, disciplined, efficient, unmistakably trained by the same hand that had trained Damon years ago. Sebastian Cole stepped forward from the shadows. He looked calm, satisfied. "Still running?" Cole said, his voice carrying easily through the chaos. "You always did prefer momentum over reflection." Damon positioned himself in front of Lydia, weapon steady. "You lost," he said. "Your access is burned. Your accounts are exposed." Cole smiled faintly. "Did you really think this was about money?" He nodded toward Lydia. "I told you she was leverage." The words struck harder than any bullet. Lydia stepped forward despite Damon's grip on her arm. "You engineered all of this," she said. "Not to control Damon, but to see if he'd choose you over power." Cole's eyes gleamed. "And did he?" Damon answered without hesitation. "Yes." The certainty in his voice stunned them both. Cole's smile faded, replaced by something colder. "Then, let's see how far that choice goes." The gunfire erupted all at once. Chaos consumed the underground level, shattered concrete, screaming tires, bodies colliding and falling. Damon moved like a force of nature, dragging Lydia with him, firing in controlled bursts. She felt another impact, sharper this time, and cried out as she stumbled. Damon turned just as one of Cole's men raised his rifle. Lydia didn't think. She grabbed the fallen weapon at her feet, hands shaking, heart roaring in her ears. The world narrowed to a single point as she pulled the trigger. The man fell. Silence hit her a second later, heavy and unreal. Lydia stared at what she had done, breath coming in short, broken gasps. Damon caught her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "You saved my life," he said fiercely. Again. Tears blurred her vision. "I didn't want this," she whispered. "I know," Damon replied, his voice breaking through its control for the first time. "I'm sorry." Cole retreated as sirens wailed in the distance, his expression unreadable as he disappeared into the chaos he had created. This wasn't defeat. It was postponement. As Damon ushered Lydia into the waiting vehicle, blood streaked down her arm. The reality settled in around them. There was no turning back now. The war was no longer about control or legacy. It was personal. And for the first time, Lydia understood the full cost of being seen not as leverage, not as a weapon, but as someone worth choosing, even when the guns answered back. The safe house was silent in the way places become after violence too clean, too still, as if sound itself were afraid to intrude. Lydia sat on the edge of the bed while a medic finished bandaging her shoulder. The pain had dulled into something distant, secondary to the weight pressing on her chest. Across the room, Damon stood by the window, speaking quietly into a secured phone, issuing orders with the same calm authority that had once terrified her. Now it unsettled her for a different reason. When the door finally closed and they were alone, the silence returned, heavier than before. "You shouldn't have been there," Lydia said, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. "You knew Cole would escalate." Damon turned slowly. "If I hadn't gone, he would have come for you anyway." "That's not an answer," she replied. He studied her for a moment, then nodded once, as if accepting a verdict. From inside his jacket, he removed a thin folder and placed it on the table between them. "You deserve to see this," he said. Lydia hesitated before opening it. The documents inside were old academic records, evaluations, encrypted notes written years before Obsidian, before Damon Cross had ever known her name. Her hands trembled as understanding dawned. "You knew about me," she said quietly. "I knew of you," Damon corrected. "Not who you were, not like this." The truth unfolded in fragments. Cole had flagged Lydia's research long ago, impressed by her ability to hear intent where others heard words. Damon had seen the reports, dismissed them as theoretical, another curiosity in a world full of them. Until Obsidian. "You didn't save me by accident," Lydia said, the realization slicing through her. "You recognized me." Damon didn't deny it. "I recognized potential." He said carefully, "I didn't know Cole had already set his trap. The honesty hurt more than a lie would have. So I was always an option." Lydia said. "A contingency." "Yes," Damon admitted. At first, she looked up sharply. And now his gaze held hers, unflinching. "Now you're the reason I burned everything he touched." The words should have comforted her. Instead, they terrified her. "You still chose," Lydia said. "Just not the way I thought." Damon stepped closer, stopping just short of invading her space. "I won't pretend my hands are clean," he said. "But when Cole moved against you, I made a decision he never would have expected." "To risk your empire?" she asked. "To dismantle it," Damon replied. That was the moment Lydia understood how far he had gone. In the days that followed, the fallout spread quietly but decisively. Accounts were frozen. Allies distanced themselves. Long-standing arrangements collapsed overnight. Damon moved with ruthless precision, not to expand his power, but to cut away the rot that had sustained it. Lydia watched from the margins, conflicted and exhausted. She saw the man behind the myth strategic, relentless, and burdened by a conscience he had never planned to develop. The intimacy between them deepened in stolen moments, shared meals in silence, brief touches that lingered too long, conversations that stopped just before becoming confessions. One evening, as rain streaked the windows, Lydia broke the fragile calm. "I can't stay," she said. Damon didn't respond immediately. When he did, his voice was quiet. "Because you're afraid. Because I'm free," Lydia replied. "And staying means becoming something I never chose to be." He nodded slowly. "I won't stop you." The simplicity of that hurt more than resistance would have. Before she left the room, Damon spoke again. "There's one more thing." He handed her a final envelope. Inside was a single document Cole's last safeguard, a transfer agreement that would strip him of control, binding his remaining assets beyond his reach. The signature line was blank. "He wanted you to see it," Damon said. "To know how this ends." Lydia closed the folder, her hands steady now. "You could destroy him with this." "Yes," Damon said. She met his eyes. "And after," Damon said quietly. "There's no going back." Lydia understood then what Cole had never accounted for. This wasn't about power or control anymore. It was about consequence. She placed the folder back on the table. "Finish it," she said. "But not for me." Damon inclined his head. "For myself." As Lydia walked away, the distance between them felt immeasurable. Yet beneath the pain, something else stirred respect, recognition, a bond forged not by manipulation, but by choice. Outside, the rain washed the city clean. Inside, Damon Cross sat alone with the truth he had never denied. Saving Lydia Hart had cost him everything he once believed he wanted. And for the first time, the loss felt like freedom. Lydia left before dawn. There was no dramatic farewell, no last look back. She packed quietly, moving through the safe house with the precision of someone who had learned long ago how to disappear without leaving echoes. By the time the sun rose, she was already on a train heading north, watching the city recede into something abstract and harmless. Distance did not erase Damon Cross from her mind. It sharpened him. In the weeks that followed, Lydia rebuilt her life with deliberate care. She returned to her studies, re-entered lecture halls that smelled of paper and coffee instead of gun oil and fear. Her mother recovered steadily, unaware of how close her life had come to being a bargaining chip. Lydia told herself that this quiet, controlled, self-earned was what freedom was supposed to feel like. And yet, some nights, she woke with Damon's voice still echoing in her chest, calm, certain, never asking permission. Damon, meanwhile, dismantled an empire. He did it methodically, without spectacle. Holdings were sold, partnerships dissolved. Entire networks vanished behind layers of legality and silence. Those who had thrived on chaos found themselves cut off, exposed, irrelevant. Sebastian Cole's influence shrank day by day, starved of access and leverage. It cost Damon more than power. It cost him identity. For the first time since his ascent, Damon Cross existed without the constant hum of control beneath his skin. The absence was disorienting. There were nights he stood alone in his office, the city below unfamiliar, and wondered whether this hollowing out was punishment or purification. He never reached out to Lydia. That restraint was the hardest choice he made. Months passed. Lydia began to breathe again. The world stopped feeling like a trap lay just beyond her vision. She smiled more easily, laughed without checking exits. She even allowed herself to believe that what she had shared with Damon, whatever it had been, belonged to a past she could leave behind without regret. Then, one afternoon, an envelope appeared in her university mailbox. No return address, no explanation. Inside was a single page, not a letter, a record. It detailed a trust established in her mother's name, irrevocable and independent, managed by parties Lydia recognized as beyond Damon's influence. No signatures from him, no conditions, just a quiet assurance that nothing and no one could use her family as leverage again. At the bottom of the page was a single sentence, written in a hand she knew too well. This is not a request. It's a correction. Lydia sat with the paper trembling in her hands, a rush of conflicting emotion tightening her throat. He had kept his promise not to protect her by possession, but by absence. That night, she dreamed of Cross Tower, not of gunfire or darkness, but of glass walls opening to let light in. Across the city, Damon received his own reckoning. Cole made one final attempt to regain control, leaking fragments of Damon's past to the press. The story exploded briefly headlines, sharp and eager, but it lacked teeth. There was no scandal to cling to, no empire left to topple. Damon met the fallout with indifference, issuing a single statement that acknowledged his past without defending it. "I am no longer that man," he said, and meant it. The world moved on quickly. Freedom, Damon learned, was quiet. The invitation came unexpectedly, slipped beneath Lydia's door one evening. A lecture series, Linguistics and Ethical Intelligence. A guest speaker discussing the limits of power and the cost of silence. The name attached was familiar. Damon Cross. Lydia stared at the card for a long time. She told herself she would not go, that some doors, once closed, were meant to remain so. But curiosity careful, insistent won out. Not for him, for herself. The auditorium was nearly full when she arrived. Damon stood at the podium, older somehow, stripped of the polish that had once made him untouchable. He spoke without notes, without performance, about systems, about language, about the danger of believing control equaled safety. He never mentioned her. When the lecture ended, the applause was respectful, restrained. Damon stepped down and turned, and their eyes met across the room. The space between them felt charged, alive with everything unsaid. He didn't approach her. That, more than anything else, told Lydia he had changed. She crossed the distance instead. They stood facing each other, neither smiling, neither looking away. Time seemed to fold inward, compressing months of silence into a single, fragile moment. "You kept your distance," Lydia said. Damon nodded. "You asked for freedom, and you gave it," she replied, without conditions. His voice was low. It was the only way it meant anything. The silence that followed was different from before. It wasn't sharp or dangerous. It was full. "I don't know what this is," Lydia said at last, "or what it could be." "I don't need to know," Damon replied. "I just need to not decide for you." Lydia felt something in her chest loosen, something she hadn't realized she'd been guarding so tightly. Outside, the city lights flickered on, steady and unthreatening. They didn't touch. But for the first time since Obsidian, the space between them felt like possibility, not distance. And that was enough to hope. The city no longer felt like a battlefield. When Lydia walked beside Damon that evening, leaving the university behind them, the streets were ordinary crowded sidewalks, warm light spilling from cafes, the low murmur of lives unfolding without urgency. It struck her how unfamiliar normalcy still felt, how much of herself had learned to listen for danger even when none announced itself. Damon noticed. He always did. "You don't have to stay," he said quietly as they reached the corner. There was no expectation in his voice, no pressure hidden beneath politeness. Not tonight, not ever. Lydia turned to face him, studying the man he had become rather than the legend he once was. The sharp edges were still there: discipline, intensity, a mind that never truly rested, but they no longer pointed outward. They were contained, deliberate, no longer in service of domination. "I know," she said. "That's why I am." They walked without destination, letting the rhythm of the city guide them. Conversation came easily now, drifting from work to books to the strange intimacy of having known each other at their most dangerous. Damon spoke of dismantling the last remnants of his old world quiet negotiations, legal severance, the deliberate choice to step back rather than rebuild. Lydia listened, not as a strategist or asset, but as someone whose opinion mattered. "You don't miss it?" she asked finally. Damon considered the question. "I miss certainty," he admitted. "Power gives you the illusion that every outcome can be controlled. And now, he said, "I'm learning how much lighter it is to choose without guarantees." They stopped near the river, the water reflecting fractured light that reminded Lydia of glass walls and rooms she would never enter again. The silence between them was not heavy. It was patient. "I was afraid," Lydia said, surprising herself with the honesty, "that if I came back into your orbit, I'd lose myself again." Damon's gaze softened. And now I see you didn't follow me," she replied. "You didn't try to reclaim anything. You changed where you stood." He nodded. Because loving someone doesn't mean standing in their way. The word hung between them, loving unforced, unclaimed, but undeniably present. Time passed, not measured in days or crises, but in shared routines. Coffee in the mornings, long conversations that wandered and returned. Damon never crossed a boundary. Lydia didn't invite him across. Lydia never had to explain why she needed space. Trust, she realized, was not built through grand gestures, but through restraint. The past did not vanish. News surfaced occasionally: Sebastian Cole's final disappearance from public influence, the quiet collapse of what remained of his network. Damon acknowledged it once, without triumph or bitterness. "It's done," he said, and meant more than just the war. Months later, Lydia stood in her apartment doorway, keys in hand, watching Damon adjust a crooked picture frame on her wall with unnecessary focus. "You don't have to fix everything," she said, amused. "I know," he replied. "Old habits." She stepped closer. "You're allowed to leave things imperfect." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and something like relief crossed his face. "So are you." The realization felt like a gift neither of them had known how to ask for. They didn't rush the future. There were no promises carved in stone, no declarations meant to bind. Instead, there were plans made with flexibility, choices revisited without fear. Lydia accepted a research position abroad for a semester. Damon encouraged her to go, even helped arrange introductions that carried no strings. When she returned, he was waiting not at an airport surrounded by security, but at a small cafe near her building, holding 2 cups of coffee and looking faintly nervous. "I wasn't sure," he admitted. "If you'd still..." She kissed him before he could finish. It wasn't desperate or dramatic. It was certain. The world did not end. No alarm sounded, no shadows closed in. It simply continued. On a quiet evening, long after the last remnants of Damon's former life had been reduced to memory, they stood together on a balcony overlooking the city. Lydia rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breath. "This is what happy looks like," she said softly. "Not perfect, just chosen." Damon wrapped an arm around her. "Careful, present. I used to think happiness was something you took," he said. "Now I know it's something you're allowed to keep." They stayed there, watching the lights flicker on one by one, the city alive and unconcerned with who they had been. For the first time, neither of them felt the need to run. The story didn't end with power reclaimed or enemies defeated. It ended with 2 people standing still, unafraid of the quiet, ready to begin again, not as saviors or weapons, but as equals who had finally chosen each other without fear.